We need to talk about Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Specifically, we need to talk about what has been going on, especially this year. I'm going to deep dive into a bit of a timeline just of her events in 2025. If you didn't catch the story this weekend, a lot of people finally caught on to an interview that she did on March 8th with Breitbart. And in that interview, she talked about how she asked the Trump administration to hold off on tariffs because they were really bad for Pierre Poilievre's campaign. She asked them to just hold off while we can put Pierre Poilievre in as our new prime minister, and Pierre will be more aligned with you. I'm going to go into details on all of that, but basically, I think we need to take a look back on things that have been going on over the last few months. Now, some people have said, could you go back a few years? No, I don't have that kind of time. I don't have enough coffee, to be frank. But I really think it's crucial that we talk about what's going on with her right now in this moment, especially in a moment where Canada and the US are at such high tensions. Let's go back a few months. January 6th, Justin Trudeau came out and said, I am going to resign as the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. And once the Liberal Party has chosen a new prime minister, I will step down from my role. And then on the 12th of January, Danielle Smith decided to take a family vacation to Mar-a-Lago. You can see her pictured here with Donald Trump and Kevin O'Leary. Kevin O'Leary, who likes to go on many US interviews and talk about being Canadian, but really thinks that we should be the 51st state. On the 19th of January, Smith flies down to DC again. This time it's for the inauguration. But she never actually makes it to the inauguration. On the 19th, she goes and with the CEO of TC Energy, she has some meetings. Francois Poirier is his name. And then on the 20th, the inauguration gets moved inside. So Smith says, oh, she's not going to the inauguration. But she did have time for meetings with Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth. So that was her down there mingling on January 20th. On February 3rd, as we know, the whole thing kicks off with Trump and Trudeau. Trump says he's going to put in tariffs. There's two different phone calls that happen that day with Trudeau. There's two different calls that day. There's actually a really great New York Times piece that you can read that tells you all the stuff that happened behind the scenes in those calls and all the threats that were made. But basically, Trump says, okay, I'm going to back down from the tariff talk right now. Danielle Smith comes out and says she's greatly heartened for the 30-day pause. I am greatly heartened to see that US President Donald Trump and the Canadian government have agreed to plan a crackdown on fentanyl trafficking and other illegal activities at our shared border. The appointment of a Canadian fentanyl czar with authority to coordinate a massive joint effort with the United States to target fentanyl traffickers is something Alberta has been calling for since it became clear in our discussions with US elected representatives and administration officials that this would be a critical part of reaching a deal to avoid tariffs. So Danielle Smith, the rest of the Canadian government plays ball. We do this 30-day pause. But everybody else, all the other premiers, our border services, they're all saying fentanyl going from Canada into the United States is actually not a problem. We'll put up the new helicopters. We'll do everything that he's requesting. We'll make sure that we're playing along. But Danielle Smith says, actually, Alberta's been dying for this since we talked to the Trump administration. On February 24th, Trump's in the Oval Office and he's doing an interview and somebody really ham-fisted spoons him a question about Canada becoming the United States and if there was a path there, to which he responds, yes, actually, there is a path for Canada joining the United States through Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Only there is a path. Alberta is first, and if they sign on, Saskatchewan would follow, and then you go west to British Columbia. There is a movement in Canada to join us. I want to get your thoughts on that and how that's proceeding right now.
So it's true. Thank you, Brian. It's true. A lot of people in Canada are liking becoming our beautiful, cherished 51st state.
What? Then on March 8th, just a week later, that's when Smith does this interview with Breitbart. Now, a lot of people didn't really catch on to the interview as it happened because Breitbart is like an alt-right news organization from the US. We don't really listen to them here. Nobody's listening to their podcast. There's a lot of times where I see a right-wing figure in Canadian media might do a podcast interview with somebody from the US and I just don't listen to them because I don't want to spend 2 hours of my day listening to Jordan Peterson talk. So I tend to skip those over and I'm sure a lot of people just went, whatever. But that has broken this past weekend, is people going, oh my God, did we actually listen to what this interview said? So in this interview, this is what she says that people have such issue with. The interviewer asks her, would a conservative prime minister likely have a better working relationship with Trump than a liberal one? And she says, before the tariff war, I would say yes. I mean, Pierre Poilievre is the name of the Conservative Party leader, and he was miles ahead of Justin Trudeau. But because of what we see as unjust and unfair tariffs, it's actually caused an increase in the support for the Liberals. And so that's what I fear, is that the longer this dispute goes on, politicians posture, and it seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now. So I would hope that we could put things on pause, is what I've told the administration officials, the Trump administration. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election. She then went on to say, I would think that there'd probably still always going to be areas that are skirmishes or disputes about particular industries when it comes to the border. But I would say on balance, the perspective that Pierre would bring would be very much in sync with, I think, the new direction of America. I think we'd have a really great relationship for the period of time they're both in, meeting Trump and Poilievre. So that's what people are really upset about, the election interference, going to a foreign government and ask them to put a hold on any sort of action that's happening so that you can get your guy in to be in charge, that they can work together, is collusion, I believe. I don't know, allegedly. I mean, I'm just laying out some timelines here, guys, but if you want to connect these dots yourselves. So that's on March 8th. Now, that is already news in the States. We keep moving on because there's a lot going on between our two countries by this time. You know, on the 4th is when the tariffs actually did come in, and there's just been a lot going on. We had to get Carney elected. A lot was happening, so he became our new party leader. Then on March 20th, two very specific things happen. Danielle Smith releases a list of demands. She meets with Mark Carney, and then on the Alberta website, she releases this list of demands. At his request, I met with Prime Minister Mark Carney today. We had a very frank discussion in which I made it clear that Albertans will no longer tolerate the way we've been treated by the federal Liberals over the past 10 years. I provided a specific list of demands for the next Prime Minister that they have to address within the first 6 months of their term to avoid an unprecedented national unity crisis. On her list of demands, guaranteeing Alberta has full access to unfettered oil and gas corridors in the north, east, and west, so through other provinces. Repealing Bill C-69, which is a No New Pipelines Act. Lifting the tanker ban off the BC coast. Eliminating the oil and gas emissions cap. Scrapping the so-called clean energy regulations. Ending the prohibition on single-use plastics. Abandoning the net zero car mandate, returning oversight of industrial carbon tax to the provinces, and halting federal censorship of energy companies. She also goes on to say, I also made it clear that Alberta, as owner of the resource, will not accept an export tax or restriction of Alberta's oil and gas to the United States. Let that sink in for a moment. She's saying, we're not going to do any taxes on anything going to the US. And that our province is no longer agreeable to subsidizing other provinces who are fully capable of funding themselves. So also picking a fight with the other provinces. And then she ends the official on-the-record statement on the Province of Alberta website by saying, with the federal election about to be called, I encourage all Albertans to get involved in what is likely one of the most pivotal and important elections in our nation's history, and to support the party and candidates that have consistently advocated for freeing Alberta from federal overreach and the repeated economic attacks our province has faced from Ottawa in the past 10 years. And on the same day, something very interesting happened. So Saskatchewan puts out on their website that they have joined the Governor's Coalition on Energy Security. And I thought, that's strange. So I looked into it a bit further because we don't have governors here. Well, this is an organization that was started in September of 2024 by a dozen very Trump-supporting Republican governors. And all of a sudden, Alberta and Saskatchewan have decided to join them. all Republicans, and now Saskatchewan and Alberta. So that's weird, especially when we consider that BC, Ontario, and Quebec, in our negotiation tactics as a country with what's going on with the tariff wars right now, the energy has been a central issue. We had Doug Ford, who threatened to turn off the electricity, who put in a surcharge temporarily. We've also had very serious discussions here in BC about the Columbia River Treaty and how that's going to affect sharing resources between the two countries. The resource sharing of energy is a really big deal, and it doesn't seem like the other provinces would be in line with Saskatchewan and Alberta suddenly joining a coalition of very Trump-heavy Republicans. A coalition whose mandate doesn't really seem to exist. From their own websites, you can't really seem to figure out what they're doing other than talking about national security of energy. So that happened. So then the next day, after this list of demands comes out, after Alberta and Saskatchewan say that they're joining the governors, there was a premiers meeting that was going on. And all of the premiers in Canada showed up, except for Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, and Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. They decided to not go and have these very important talks with all of the other premiers. They just decided not to show up. They did, however, call into the meeting, but at a time when national security and our tensions are high with our neighbors to the south who keep threatening to invade and occupy us through annexation, it's very interesting. And while today is only March 23rd and all of this timeline is up until this moment, I do want to point your attention to what's happening on March 27th. And that's when Danielle Smith is once again going to the United States, and she is going to be doing a talk with Ben Shapiro at a gala for PragerU. Now, PragerU is a non-accredited university. It's a non-profit advocacy group that promotes conservative ideas and policies. So Danielle Smith, although she's been called out quite a bit for wanting to associate with Ben Shapiro, who has a long list of offenses, including, you could just go to the GLAAD website and they'll tell you all the things that he's been homophobic and transphobic about there. But yeah, she's decided to spend her time with him. This is a timeline just of things that have happened in the past few months. And, when the piece came out this weekend about Danielle Smith, I'm just going to editorialize a little bit here. When the piece came out, I was not super surprised. And a lot of people were reacting and saying, why aren't you more shocked? Why aren't you covering this? Why aren't you talking about it all the time? And I think because for me, I have felt that the Conservative Party of Canada has been quite aligned with Trump supporters and Trump administration values for quite some time now. It was no coincidence when I used to see there was a lot of anti-trans protests in the US, and then they started popping up in Canada, and they were using the exact same literature. I personally lost a friend of 30 years who fell down that rabbit hole and started believing that propaganda. When I asked her to show me what was going on, she showed me pieces that I knew had come from Florida, that I knew had come from United States sources that had nothing to do with SOGI being taught in BC schools. So I have seen those alignments. We've all seen the Liberal Party ads, where Trump says something and then Poilievre says the same thing. I've also covered recently the fact that, I talk about we have a Trump problem. There are a lot of links between the Trump administration and people who support the Trump administration with Pierre Poilievre as well. And these things are not, it doesn't feel coincidental to me. Now, I've laid out a full timeline of events of note that I think that maybe people should look into based on the fact that you're now interested in what's going on because of this interview, this podcast that came out on March 8th, but has become a really big news story right now, that I think maybe people should look into a little further, because we do have an election coming up. Mark Carney did announce today, April 28th would be our election day. And the government of Canada has also put out warnings that we need to be aware that there's going to be attempts at foreign interference. There's going to be attempts at online manipulation of bots and trolls, things that I've done a lot of troll reports on already. We are going to start seeing more and more of that. But we also have to take a closer look at our own politicians and who they're actively already working with and not hiding it. When they're going on interviews and saying these things, that's something we need to be aware of as well. So if I've missed anything in this video, please drop a comment below. Let me know if there's any other significant events that I should be talking about. But yeah, just something to be aware of as we move forward, as this conversation, I'm sure, is going to continue over the next few weeks. I just thought I would lay out the timeline for you as I've noticed it. I'm not saying, that old where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't know that there's a fire, but there's a lot of smoke right now. So let me know what you think, and I will see you again soon.